let's put this thing in the shop and start tearing this thing apart. So the first big thing that we're going to be putting on the Rambler is a set of coilovers. All right, so just like that, the coilovers are installed. What's going on, guys? It's finally time. I've been waiting for this day probably since the beginning of this YouTube channel, and it's a big one. So I'll show you guys what we're gonna be doing. So if you guys been following us a little bit, you know that the first build that we ever did on this YouTube channel is the Rambler station wagon. Now, I'll give you guys a little bit of a walk around on it if you guys are new and haven't really known the whole history of this thing, but I'll also link the full playlist of the build series here. The build series is a little rough. I was really new to editing and filming and everything like that, so it's not the best, but you kind of get the gist of what we did to this thing. So this is a 1961 Rambler station wagon. It's actually a Rambler Classic is the model, and when I saw this thing, I knew we had to do something cool with it. I didn't really know much about building stuff at the time. We really hadn't done hardly anything, especially to this caliber, but it was a really neat car and I really love the body style of it, and I also am a big sucker for station wagons. So in my opinion, I love the roofline of the Ramblers. I think it has the coolest station wagon look, so I really wanted to build one. At the time, we were working at this shop and we have a lot of capabilities, but I personally just don't have a whole lot of money to be able to put into a full build like this. So I kind of built it for my budget, but I was able to actually do some really neat stuff with the capabilities that we have here at our shop. So this Rambler station wagon is actually sitting on a custom chassis that we made. This is actually uses the front suspension of a C4 Corvette and the Dana 44 out of the C4 Corvette. So it does have independent rear suspension and it has independent front suspension from the Corvette, but that's pretty much all that's left of the C4. We actually ended up putting an LS1 out of a Camaro in this thing, and I really wanted a manual transmission, so we're going with a T56 6-speed. So it's a really good setup. The Dana 44 is the weirdest part of the thing in the rear, but it actually works really good. We have that thing completely built. We have a true track in the rear. It's got 410 gears. It handles really good with the Corvette suspension. It's obviously got disc brakes all the way around, power steering, and everything like that. But that's kind of where it stops. If you guys watch the full build series, you know that we actually built this thing to go on Hot Rod Power Tour many years ago, and we actually didn't make it. So we actually designed this whole car in CAD. We took about 6 months to be able to do the whole thing in CAD, and then it actually took us 2 months to physically build the whole thing. So 2 months just doing a whole build like this with a complete body swap is not enough time really to do the whole thing correctly. So there's a lot of stuff that we had done really halfway, and we want to finally try to fix this thing. Underneath the hood is kind of where I'm going to start. Now, we have these radiator brackets and stuff that we had made because the whole front end is actually supposed to tilt up so that way we can access the engine compartment, but we never actually did that. This car is actually a lot easier to work on than I figured because we actually pushed the motor really far back so it can have a center of gravity that we wanted in this thing, so it matches the Corvette. We actually had cut the firewall, you can see the seam there, and made a custom firewall and pushed the thing completely back so that way we could fit our LS engine into this platform. Now, we didn't really need to do that. We could have raised the motor up, but we wanted this thing to actually handle like a Corvette, but look like an old station wagon on the outside. That was kind of the goal for the project. So by doing that, we actually kind of limited ourselves a little bit by pushing the motor back. It's harder to work on, and in the foot room in the car, it actually is really tight in there. So we had to overcome some challenges with that, but ultimately it ended up working pretty good with the way that it came out. But it actually is really not that bad to work on. To be able to get to all the plugs and everything is really easy. So we're gonna just make the front end stationary so you won't actually tilt the whole front end off. So what we need to do is actually fixture the front end. As you can see right now, there's no core support in this car, and it's actually just bolted through the Corvette frame here on the front. There's 2 bolts like this on the front, and that's literally the only thing holding the whole front end on. Also, this inner fender is actually structural. This is a unibody car, so it has a frame rail that comes down right here, and that holds the front bumper. Now if you can see this, the entire frame rail has broken off. When we actually drove this thing at LS Fest, we drove it on the road course track and it really beat the crap out of this thing, and it ended up breaking our frame rail right here. So we have to fix that. We have to do a bunch of stuff, but I kind of want to redo how the whole front end is really held on. The other thing is, you guys remember in one video, the hood latches weren't latched and the hood flew up, and it actually ended up bending our hinges in here, and it ended up bending the hood. We got the hood kind of straightened out, but we want to try to get that better so we can straighten that out. And we got to redo our hinge setup here. So we're going to try to redo all that, basically just pull this whole front clip off and kind of start over fresh slate, so that way we can get this thing dialed in, and that way the whole front end and the hood will be finally done and finalized. Just a quick rundown under the hood. We have a Corvette accessory drive from like a C5, C6 on the LS1 here. We have a Mustang Hydro Boost because you can see our tire would have hit a normal brake booster because this car's so low. So we ended up going with a Hydro Boost. That works pretty good. We have all the Corvette rack and pinion. We have the Corvette control arms and brakes and everything like that. And then we've grafted it into the frame that we actually made for this thing. So up front, that's pretty much it. But you can just kind of see the quality of this thing. There's wires everywhere. We want to clean all this stuff up. We have air shocks in this thing right now to raise it up and down. We got some suspension upgrades we're going to do. We literally have wire nuts holding the radiator together. Do not do that. Do your project complete, and then you won't have to worry about it. There's just the wiring in this thing is really temporary, and we just tried to get it together to go to some shows whenever we got the thing done, and we never got around to actually fixing it. But you can see on the interior, that's going to be the next big thing that we're going to do, is we're going to just rip all this out and redo it. We actually want to make a center console for this, and we're going to try to add a valance to try to hide all of the wiring. All this wiring is going to be ripped out and redone. We have a new steering column. We just have a bunch of new parts that we're going to be putting in this thing to try to update it and make this thing look presentable. We are having some rear end noise out of the Dana 44, so we're going to try to pull that out and look and see what's going on there. In the back here, we have a bunch of parts that I've been collecting for this thing, but I actually do have a new fuel cell that we're going to be putting in this, because the fuel cell is actually under the floor back here, and it scrapes on everything, and it actually isn't an intake pump, it's an external pump, and we have a lot of fuel slosh issues. So I went with this tank so that way we can have an in-tank pump. We won't have any more fuel slosh issues. There was actually originally a rear seat that folded up, and we got rid of that because of the suspension that we have in the rear. So I want to try to clean this up, make like a little compartment back here, and then really make it look a lot nicer and finalize the interior. So with all that said, we're trying to make it for Hot Rod Power Tour this year, so we got a lot of work to do in the few months coming up. So let's put this thing in the shop and start tearing this thing apart. All right, so we got the Rambler pulled in the shop here. So the first thing that I want to tackle is try to rip off the front end. That way we can kind of get to everything underneath of it so we can try to fix it. This thing's kind of barely on here as it is. So we're gonna go ahead, and there's a bunch of bolts underneath the doors. Try to pull those out and then pull the front clip off. That way we can kind of get to everything that we have to tackle. And then I'll go ahead and pull the Rambler out, and we can just rip out basically everything on the inside of it. Then we have a fresh slate. We can kind of restart from where we left off. All right, we got the whole front clip pulled off. Took a little bit to get it off. This thing is really flimsy the way that it's kind of rigged together right now. We see we have this bar connecting it, so that way it holds the fenders together, but the way we had it is just very temporary because we knew we were going to do this in the future. We just didn't know we'd be doing it this many years later. So we are going to try to tackle all the stuff in the engine bay and everything like that, but simultaneously we're going to actually be doing the interior as well. So we have a lot of stuff to do. Just tearing this thing down and getting it to kind of a bare shell almost. So I'm debating on trying just to pull the motor out, because I really do want to redo the firewall. There's a lot of stuff like the fuel pressure regulator and all this like mounting stuff and the wiring obviously that I really don't like. So pulling the engine out might be a better option. That way I can get to everything and then clean it up, repaint everything, make it nice, and then put it all back together. I also have a bunch of really cool stuff for the engine that I have, so I'm gonna try to get all that stuff on, but we have a lot of stuff to do. So I'm gonna push this thing back up on the lift, and I can show you guys the first mod that we're gonna do for the Rambler. All right guys, so the first big thing that we're going to be putting on the Rambler is a set of coilovers. Now I've been waiting to put coilovers on this thing for a long time. It actually has kind of a jank little air suspension setup right now, and we wanted to really upgrade this thing for handling. So we got all of these coilover kits for this car from After Dark Speed. These guys are awesome. So I've been looking basically for a C4 Corvette coilover kit, and they're really expensive, one, and it's also hard to find one for our particular year, which is actually a 1987 donor car. So After Dark Speed has almost all the C4 Corvette kits that you can find. Every year they make a kit for it, and it's really awesome. They also have other Corvette models as well. They're really an awesome resource for Corvette coilover stuff. So we reached out to them, and they helped us out a ton with getting us set up for our Rambler here. So I'll show you guys what we got for this thing. Now this still uses the fiberglass leaf spring in there, so we're gonna get rid of all that, and we can have some adjustability. So what's really nice about this kit is not only is it a dual adjustable coilover, so this will be awesome. We can tune it for the road, tune it for autocross. We can do kind of any kind of setup that we really want to do with the car. It has Viking coilovers, and then it actually uses some 450-pound springs, and so those are going to be fitted for the weight that we have of the Rambler. And then it also comes with all these bracketry that we're going to make this thing work. So what's really cool is they changed the control arm a little bit on the years, varying what year you have of the C4. So they actually make a specialty kit that'll adapt to any kind of year that you want. So this one's designed for the 1987 year. I have this whole kit here. I'm gonna try to throw this thing on and see how it fits with our Rambler, because there are some things that we had changed a little bit in the rear suspension that might make a coilover kit be a little bit difficult to install, but we're gonna get this thing in there and see what we gotta do. All right, so the first thing that we're gonna have to do is pull off all of the control arm and stuff, because we're gonna have to remove our leaf spring in the front. Drop this whole thing down, and then we can assemble our coilovers in that whole kit, and then get that assembled in here. All right, so we pulled the entire leaf spring assembly out. I actually ended up having to cut it because you really have to just pull the whole control arm out, but we're not gonna need it anyway. So I just sliced it in a few spots and it came right out. So we ended up pulling the lower ball joints out because they're bad. So good time to replace them and clean up all the control arms and stuff. So I'm kind of debating on whether I should just pull these out and clean them up really good. I started to clean this one, and it came out pretty good, but it's really hard because these are cast aluminum, so the dirt just kind of buries itself in there. But all this stuff I really want to clean up really nice, and that way it's nice whenever we go to work on this thing and so covered in grease every time. Gonna try to just clean everything up before we put our new shiny parts on this thing and get it as good as we can get it. All right, so we got our lower control arm ball joints in there. Got new ones. We're gonna have to get the top ones replaced also, but we're waiting on those. So we're gonna go ahead and try to fit the new coilover in here. So basically the issue with this car is it's an 87, so the lower control arm is a little different than the later C4 Corvettes, but the biggest difference is there isn't a sway bar link mount on the lower control arm. So the kit actually relocates the sway bar link so that way we can run it with the coilover setup. All right, so this is our bracket that we're going to use to actually mount the coilover. So you can see this little hole in here is where the bottom of the coilover mounts. We're gonna have to mark that because we have to access a bolt on the bottom of it. So we're gonna have to drill through the bottom control arm to be able to get to that. And then we're gonna actually have to open the top up a little bit so that way we can get the top coilover mount on there. Alright, so now you can get a little bit better idea. So this bracket is going to go on like this, and then it's going to bolt in just like that. And so now we can get through the bottom of this thing and get to the bottom bolt. Alright, so just like that, the coilovers are installed. We have this stuff kind of loosely mocked up because we're still going to change this upper ball joint, but that is done on the front coilovers. So you can see our bracket, our sway bar link and everything is installed. Same thing on the other side. So the front is completely done except for those ball joints. So now we can go ahead and lift this thing up and we can go see how the back is going to go. Alright, so here's the back. So we have our leaf spring running across the back, and then we already pulled the shock off. So this is basically how it works. There's a new bolt that goes on the bottom here that I'm gonna have to pull this off, and then I have to take this nut out for one of the trailing arms. And this bracket will go here and bolt in like that. So that's basically where the bottom of the coilover will go. I have to change this bolt still. And then it goes all the way up to the top here. So this flange is where the top of the coilover should mount. But we have to pull the leaf spring out, and we have to pull this shock out, and then we can go ahead and install this. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull the leaf spring out. That way it's out of the way. We can have some tension to raise this up and down. So it'll be a little bit easier to put the coilover in. Alright guys, the rear coilovers are in. This kit is really nice, especially for this model year. I wasn't really sure how it was going to fit with the way that we have the suspension, but it fits pretty good. So after I put the coilovers in, I didn't really film putting it on the ground because we're working on like 16 other things at one time, but this is what the car looks like on the ground. So it is a lot lower than it was on the old suspension. So we're going to have to try to modify the brackets that bolt the coilovers to the car to raise it up a little bit because it's just a little too low. Now the reason it's too low is just because of the weight of the Rambler. It obviously weighs way more than a C4 Corvette. And so we want to get a little bit more suspension travel out of the shocks. So we're going to actually make some custom brackets to be able to mount the coilovers up a little bit differently. And that'll give us a little bit more ride height just because of the weight of the car versus a C4 Corvette. The Rambler actually weighs 3,500 pounds, so it's not crazy heavy, but for a Corvette, it's a lot lighter than this, especially with where the weight is on the car. Since it's a station wagon, the rear of the car is a lot heavier with the station wagon body over the rear. The front is probably about the same, but man, that front bumper is really heavy, especially with all the steel that's in this thing. So we're gonna modify this stuff in the future, and you guys will see that on the next episode of Rustomod. But we're finally bringing back the Rambler station wagon. We're trying to get this thing ready for Hot Rod Power Tour this year. So make sure you like, comment, subscribe so you can stay up to date on all the progress we make here with the Rambler and all the projects we have here on Rustomod. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you in the next episode.